Hi everybody. We're here for a live version of our FYI webinar series. Today, let me get to my slides. Okay, so we are talking today about how to host a voter registration event / campaign, because our presenter today, Jim McGlinchey, really is the expert in campaigns, but we also can talk about how to host an event. A quick housekeeping item that we are on Zoom, but we're also live on Facebook. And so if you have questions, if you use the Zoom link, you'll have to submit your questions on the chat box. But if you're on Facebook, just type them into the comments and we'll watch the questions as we see them. And so today's presenter is Jim McGlinchey. He is a director with the Portuguese American Citizenship Project. And that was a project, he give you a little bit of history about that, but that was a project that for over 10 years focused solely on getting Portuguese Americans to register to vote and to vote. And they did lots of campaigns nationally, not just in one coast or the other. And they have published a final report of all the work that they've done, the data that they collected in this book that is, it's available now, correct, Jim?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yeah, it's available now. If you go to that website, PortugueseAmerican.org, you can purchase a copy of the final report. And so I'm going to hand it over to Jim. So jump in, Jim, and tell us a little bit about the project and doing voter campaigns.
Sure. But thank you very much for arranging all this, all the technical difficulties that come with these sort of operations.
Late, but it's okay.
Just one point of information is I ran the project from 1999 to 2009 for 10 years. But then Antonio Borba took it over for the next 3 years, and then Stephen Nascimento took it over for the following 3 years. We ended the project in 2016, and so those gentlemen really carried the can for the last 6 years of this operation, as it were. One of the contributions, of the many contributions, Antonio Borba said, and it's on the back of the book, it said, "Organize to make a difference." We talk about, these are the guiding principles we have in this whole operation. We want to make sure that anything we do with volunteer efforts and community organizing registers on the political spectrum. People notice what you're doing and they understand what you're doing. You're not doing it in a vacuum. I mean, that's not to minimize the fact that if you have a voter registration form and convince your cousin who came over for a cup of coffee to finally register to vote, that you're not doing good and noble things. It's just that the Citizenship Project tried to do things on a broader scale. We tried to move the needle, as it were. One registered voter in a country of 330 million people is not going to make a big difference, but a community of 100 people, 200 people, the church of 2,000 people can make a difference if they engage in a wholesale campaign. The other important thing to understand is we are completely and have been nonpartisan. I talked about this when I did a previous webinar with PALCUS on the history of the Citizenship Project, which discussed the whole book. And nonpartisanship is important. First of all, most organizations are not for profit, and they are enjoined. It's against the law for them to endorse either a candidate or to endorse any particular issue. It also puts you on the high moral ground. What you're doing is getting people to vote. You're not pushing them in any direction. And the idea that no one can turn around and criticize you because you're just simply telling people to exercise their civil rights. Very important parts of this whole process. So if we move to the next slide, what we're going to talk about is the importance of understanding voter registration rules and regulations. Then we're going to talk about suggested strategies that we employed in the Citizenship Project. But I must emphasize, it's not to the exclusion of other efforts. It's just what we did, we measured it, and it worked. So, and then the following thing is we'll talk about follow-up measures. Registering to vote is only part of the process. People have to cast a vote. We found when we were doing all these measurements that the largest collection of registered voters in any particular church or club by far is the under 30 population, Portuguese Americans under 30. The smallest number of voters by far is registered voters under 30. So
Oh, wow.
registering people under 30 doesn't solve the problem.
You got to get them to vote.
Myself, and I can assure you I'm over 30 years old by a substantial margin. We vote, and that's why people care about us as an age group. What we want to people care about Portuguese Americans as a group is that they vote. So if we go to the next slide, we'll go into all this.
Before we do that, I just want to reiterate something that you mentioned, Jim, which is really important, which is what we're talking about here today isn't the only way to do this. This is
Correct.
Just talking about how the Portuguese American Citizenship Project ran campaigns. We know that, for example, NYPALC in New York, they have voter registration events that are very successful. And we'll talk a little bit about that, maybe not there specifically, but the fact that you can have an event as well. And I'm sure that there are other folks that have done these kinds of things in other parts of the country, and we would love to hear from them, right? So if you have suggestions to add to this, please, write your comments in the comments below on Facebook, or send us an email, because we can always do a follow-up on things like this, a follow-up webinar, and continue the conversation. This isn't just like a one and done. So thank you for bringing that up, Jim. I think that's an important point to make.
No, it is. It's vitally important. We don't have a monopoly on this system.
Right.
You look at all over the country and different ethnic groups, different groups, and how they go about it. It's all over the place. And so this is just an idea. So you can take parts of the idea of what we're suggesting too. So we're just throwing this out there. So getting into voter registration rules. Before I prepared this talk, I looked at some of the states and some of the voter registration rules, and one that really struck me, this is from Mississippi. Mm-hmm. You cannot register to vote if you've been convicted of voter fraud, murder, rape, bribery, et cetera, all these evil things. But the one that got to me is timber larceny. Who knew that if you were involved in timber larceny that you couldn't register to vote? Now, this is an arcane thing in the Portuguese American community. I'm sure there are some there. It's not large and numerous, but there are rules in Florida, where there are many Portuguese Americans. The political football of registering to vote versus people convicted of felony has been in the press for years, a couple years now. People that are involved in voter registration campaigns and events have to understand the rules. They have to understand who is eligible within their state to register to vote. You can get that information, and we'll talk about that from the local registrar of voters, from official documents and things like that. Mm-hmm. But you have to be at least a semi-expert on what's going on. To the reductio ad absurdum was in some communities where we got people all revved up to register to vote. People showed up, and we asked them, "Well, are you a citizen? U.S. citizen?" Mm. Well, no, but I want to register to vote. There's all degrees of knowledge and information out in the system. Just have to make sure that people are aware. Because if you register to vote and you're not a U.S. citizen, you're committing a crime. So we don't want that.
So what about illegal residents? So folks that have a green card, for example.
No, you have to be a citizen of the United States of America, duly sworn, naturalized. A green card doesn't cut it. All these things, if they seem obvious to people that are involved in it, but if you're, just somebody that's running a very successful, some of these people, we're not talking about people that are working out in the fields and are not educated. We're talking about people that are very educated, except they're focused on being a pharmacist or being a doctor or being a gazillionaire. Some of these people are very wealthy, but they just never thought about it. And they said, yeah, sure, everybody votes. And I've been here. Some of these people came here as children and they never naturalized their situation because there was never any need to. We've heard of stories like that. You just have to make sure people don't trip over this perfectly obvious thing. But also there's the arcane things. In some of the, quote, battleground states, who's eligible to vote or not can really hinge on things. And felonies sound like a really bad thing, but if you're 18 years old and you stole a car and now you're 55, 60 years old and you've led an honorable life, you got a suspended sentence. You paid a $1,000 fine, you got a suspended sentence. Now you're 50 years later, you're a U.S. citizen and you want to register to vote. Well, you got a felony conviction out there and you got to make sure that's taken care of. These are all little details that happen. Most people, it's straight, I didn't register to vote because I'm too lazy. All right, we'll take care of you. But these are things you have to take care of. So go to the next slide, please.
Well, I think this is really important to know because I mean, even from myself, I really wasn't aware that there were so many, I guess, restrictions to even registering. Voting, yes, right? But even to just register, had no idea. So I think things like this are really important for people to know.
Yeah, so but it's important for the people that are organizing this have an awareness. They don't have to know all the details, but they have to know where the tripwires are so that they don't get stuck in this thing. Okay.
Right.
On to the next one. This is a California voter registration form, and it's pretty straightforward. I mean, these people, there's experts that looked at this to make sure that it's as simple as possible. But I, for one, when I'm faced with this many blanks, I inevitably put my last name, put my first name where it's supposed to be last name, or my last name where it's supposed to be the first. I mean, just stupid things. You have to have people that can check these out, because if you put your first name where the last name is and your last name where the first name is, which I'm guilty of many times, or you got, your addresses and all this other stuff, everything has to be done correctly. If it goes, then it goes forward and it goes smoothly forward. If there's a hiccup in there, they can get kicked back. People are getting confused. So these forms, even though they're designed to be as simple as possible, they are mandated to come up with information to be on the voter registrar rolls. And in every state, this pretty much is the standard type of form. So the people that are running a campaign, again, have to acquaint themselves, and they have to be very precise. They have to be detail oriented when they're helping people to fill out these forms. And sometimes you have a language problem. This is in English. There are some in foreign languages. I'm not sure. I think there may be some in New England in Portuguese. But nonetheless, most people are going to be confronted with English language voter registration forms. And if you're not a native speaker of English and you're in my age bracket, you may have a problem figuring this out. Mm-hmm. Some people are illiterate. You can be illiterate and still have the right to vote. You do not lose your right to vote. So these things can all be overcome. They just have to be aware of the problem.
Right.
So move on to the next one. Also, there's a thing up this again in terms of information. This sounds like a whole lot, but these are simple facts you just have to be aware of as a citizen. That the voter registration deadlines, you have to make sure, and this is just an example of this year in Massachusetts, if you want people to register for the state primary election, and in Massachusetts, this is a good example because it's a heavily dominated by Democrats. If you're in Arizona or Mississippi, where it's heavily dominated by Republicans, it's the same story. The primary election determines who's going to run in the general election, who's going to win. So if you win the state primary election in Massachusetts as a Democrat, you have a very high chance of winning. If you're in Georgia and you win the state primary election for the Republicans, you have a very high chance of winning. So like with primaries, you have to make sure that people are registered to vote before September 1st of 2020. And that's in the office of the voter registrar. So
now, I'm
sorry, that's where the primary election is. The voter registration deadline is August 12th. If you read down on this top column here.
Right.
Is that obvious? Then the absentee ballot, that's another can of worms. But again, deadlines count. Right. If you don't hit the deadline, if you send in your voter registration forms from your church on August 13th for the primary election, you've missed the vote.
So, for example, in order, I think, the most important election for everybody in the country right now is the presidential election. And correct. So at a minimum, if you aren't registered to vote by, at least in Massachusetts, October 14th,
correct.
It might be the same in other states, it might be different, but if you are not registered by that date, you cannot vote in the presidential election. Right?
I can guarantee you, yes, you're absolutely right, but I can guarantee you that voter registration deadline changes from state to state.
So it's important for people to check.
In some states, you can register on the day of the election.
Interesting. Okay.
And some, they're like 60 days before the election. I mean, it's all over the map on these places. Again, you have to be aware of these things. And the game is, like, if you have a you're really focused on the presidential election, and next month you have a voter registration event. Well, the problem is nobody really is focused on that yet. They're in a normal year. Now this year, all bets are off, but everybody's in their summer vacation, things like that. So you want to have the voter registration event somewhere close where people are thinking about the general election. They're turned on by events. The newspaper's filled with it and stuff like that. But you can't get too close to the flame, or otherwise it doesn't count. So again, just being aware of it, giving yourself time, plenty of time to both have the people fill out the form, for a committee to review it, to make sure that you don't have your first name where the last name's supposed to be, that all the dates of birth and all the blocks are filled in. So you have to have time to do that. So in a sense, the deadline's October 14th. You should at least have it by October 1st, so that all the forms can be done. You have time to fix it in, and it can get to the to the voter registrar.
And the different ways to register, obviously there's the paper form. Can you vote? Can you register online? I know you can't vote online.
Yes, in fact, that form that I showed you was a voter registration form online. That was an online form for California.
Okay, great.
But again, it's all over the place. California is probably in the forefront of this whole operation. So, this is. There are other things that we have to consider in this, and I can bring them up later, but we'll move on to the next.
Okay.
Hold on a second. I gotta. I'm moving on here, please.
Suggested strategy, is that where we are?
Yeah, we're on the strategy.
Okay.
It was pointed out to me that everything has to be checked off. You can't miss a block in these things. Otherwise, it can be kicked back. It depends. Most voter registrars want you to register to vote. Their job is to get as many people voting as possible. Right. With some exceptions, but we won't get into that. But basically, what you're doing is you're helping them. So probably, and we'll talk about this later, is you can go visit the voter registrar and actually get a quick 2-hour, 1 hour, 15-minute, whatever briefing on what they need to do and what to look out for, because they're experts in the field. All right, so the strategy, at least what we employed in the Citizenship Project, is the whole mantra is organize to make a difference. So you're working with a group of people. The largest group, especially in New England, of registered voters in the county of Bristol, which is Fall River, New Bedford, and Taunton, are Portuguese American churches. The top 6 collection of registered voters are Portuguese American churches. Same thing in Rhode Island. When you get into New Jersey, there's huge churches. Our Lady of Fatima and Elizabeth, it's 2,500 registered voters. That's a lot of people. And I don't care whether you're talking about federal elections, it's a bit muted, but you're talking about state elections, federal, city elections, off-year elections, those are large numbers of people. So what you do is engage the entire, what we did, I have to say, is engage the entire membership. So you take on a church, you take on the entire church with obviously the agreement and support of the pastor. If you take on the Rancho Folklorico, make sure that the president and their committee know exactly what you're doing, and they are behind you 100%. Second part is create a committee to manage the campaign from beginning to end. You need to get a hardcore, a nucleo duro of people, 3 or 4 people that are committed to this operation. And if you can't find 3 or 4 people in a church or in a club, well, you're not going to be able to pull this off. You need people that carry the can. I think PALCUS, and I'm not to get personal about this, PALCUS sells a nucleo duro of leaders. And so when the fortunes go up and down and stuff like that, there are hardcore people that care about the system and make it their business that things succeed. And that's what makes these things happen. So in every organization, there has to be this hardcore of people that said, okay, we're in, we're committed, and we're going to do it. Now, what we did in all these things, and we found this by trial and error. None of this, we didn't come in and, suddenly the clouds parted and we understood what was going on. We found this out the hard way. But we found out that we did mass mailings. So like with a church or a club, we had a letter of introduction. First of all, churches are involved with saving souls. And a lot of people said, not to mix metaphors, what the hell are you doing dealing with politics? You had to answer that question. You have to answer that question if you have a social club. Why are we involved in politics? You have to set the stage to get people turned on to this system. And this is not just voter registration. You're trying to turn them on to the whole process, get all through the voting process. So what we did is we have a letter, which is going to follow in this thing. We included in every letter to every family in the church a voter registration card with each letter. And we're going to talk about that more. And then later on, we'll talk about offering assistance. Again, vetting, making sure all the forms are filled out correctly. Publicizing the campaign. We want to make sure that this doesn't happen in a vacuum. We want the political system, the political establishment to understand what's going on. You want people to love you, but you also want people to fear you. Those are two mutually complementary situations. And the last thing is to keep records, if possible. So if we go to the next slide, this is a sample letter, and it's hard to read, on your computer screen, but it's from Monsignor João Antão from Our Lady of Fatima in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And basically it said he's responsible for Our Lady of Fatima, and he can't be indifferent to the instruction of the American bishops and the Faithful Citizenship Program, which I talked about in our previous webinar about the Catholic Church's Faithful Citizenship Project, which said, the parishioners, it's your civic duty. It's an important part of your civic duty and your as a member of the church to participate in civic affairs. The idea of the church is to create a just society. Now, and just to sit aside, there are people that, the church is in some, shall we say, some of their issues are Republican favored issues and some are Democratic issues. With the Catholic Church, you take on the whole enchilada. You take in from the beginning of conception and you take on to death. It's all of life. But a just society, we can deal with that. But they're also a not-for-profit organization. They cannot get involved in endorsing politicians. So that's why we work with them. But basically he gets down, he says, I wish to ask one more time, because we did this before, if you're an American citizen and registered to vote, don't forget to vote. If you're an American citizen, number two is if you're an American citizen but not registered to vote, fill out the enclosed form that we are sending entitled voter registration. Fill it out, return it in the envelope included, and we'll assume responsibility for submitting the voter registration form. Basically, the things came back to a committee. The church went through it and made sure it was all correct. And then they took it all, the whole mass of things. There was like, I don't know, 200, 300, 400, I don't know what the number, it was in the hundreds of completed voter registration forms to the voter registrar in Elizabeth. Well, first of all, that creates a seismic, a couple hundred voter registrations form isn't one or two that you just managed to complete. They know that you did something. Also, when the church sent out these letters, they went to the voter registrar and asked them for about 1,500, or no, there was about 2,000 blank voter registration cards. That in and of itself sets off seismic waves. Because City Hall is a small place. The voter registrar office is part of a larger city government. Well, when the voter registrar is down having lunch with the local city councilman or people like that, that word spreads instantaneously about what's going on. So you become a public event, as it were. And then, but the other part, they sort of rounded out. So if you're not a U.S. citizen, fill out the coupon, another coupon included, and return an enclosed envelope. In several weeks, we'll get in contact you, begin the process of obtaining American citizenship. So they sort of covered the whole waterfront. But what we did, when you think about it, okay, we got a couple hundred people that are registered to vote, but you put a blank voter registration form on every kitchen table in that parish. So when your cousin Manny comes over to have a cup of coffee or maybe have a glass of wine, and he's not voting, but he complains constantly about the way his government's working, you say, hey, Manny, we got something here that can solve your problems. And he's stuck. He's either going to get his cup of tea or his glass of wine or and fill out the form or whatever. But basically, there was a follow-on effect. It created, you didn't have one or two people doing voter registration. You had every family in the church being a potential active agent, shall we say, to do that. So if you go to the next.
And just a question here, or something to point out, because you mentioned on point number 3 that if you're not an American citizen, fill out this coupon, and then we'll get in contact with you and help you start the citizenship process, right? So correct. I guess as you're forming your committee, you have to decide, are you going to take on that also? And if you have the capability, right? So if you can, great. If not, where do we send these people that aren't citizens that might need assistance doing that? So that would be something to address.
It's been my experience that in every church in New England and every major church in New England, in New Jersey, and in California has a citizenship process already in place. So what you're doing is funneling them in. Now, if you have a banda philharmonica, if you have a rancho folklorico or a social club, you probably don't. But you probably know of a church or of a citizen. You can funnel them into either a non-parochial, non-Catholic venture, because the city governments and state governments have these all over the place, and you could be aware of that. But no, this is just taking people that say, yeah, I want to, and they're sort of missing in action. He said, great. And Our Lady of Fatima had that. New Jersey, the Portuguese American Congress, the shirt I'm wearing, by the way, of New Jersey, they had basically one of the smoothest, best running operations I've ever seen. And that they just said, give them that thing. So if you're in Elizabeth, you can give it to the Portuguese American Congress and they'll take it over from there. So on to the next. Now this was a message that got involved. A lot of these letters were copied from church to church. There was, everybody put their own theme on it. But this one we had in several churches, and this was actually in a voter registration drive out of the Centro Romeo Cascais in Harrison. And se não votarmos, a administração desta vila nunca terá em conta nossa comunidade, estaremos condenados a ser eternamente apenas pagadores de impostos, sem qualquer voz sobre o modo o nosso dinheiro é gasto. If we don't vote, the leadership of this city will not pay attention to our community. It will be eternally condemned to be mere payers of taxes without any voice in how our money is spent. Eternally condemned. I love that phrase. It's true. If you sit there and never vote, if you as a community don't vote and don't register and don't participate, that's what happens. But I just had to throw that in because that was one of my favorite, especially when you throw it into a church.
You got to go with what works, right? I mean,
that's right. It got people's attention. Okay, so on to the next slide there. All right, the other thing is to publicize the campaign. If you had, and the way we did this, if you've already gone to the voter registrar and you've already got these things off, you've created, especially within the city bounds and the local community, you've created a public knowledge of what's going on. Well, people that have not gotten that, and this came out of the Immigrant Assistance Center in New Bedford, was basically a press release that's saying, this is what we're doing, which got into the local newspapers also. So if people are like turning a blind eye to all this stuff, it's going to be put right in front of their faces on what's going on. And then other things like the website, social media, of which I admit I have absolutely no clue about. Facebook, again, absolutely no clue about. But these things are even better. And I mean, we're on Facebook right now, so it's even more powerful ways of getting the information out that we're involved and we're players in this game. The local radio, the Portuguese language radio and the English language radio picked it up in New England. Television also, we had ads on that. And then the passing out flyers at events. Just so people are aware, this is not happening in a vacuum. And it's not just one or two people that are courageously out there trying to do their best. This is an event. This is something that's shifting the gears. You just got photobombed.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yeah, just to reiterate your point, I mean, nowadays we have so many different ways of getting information out there that, take advantage of all of them, right? And even if it's one particular church or club that's running a campaign or an event, there's no reason why they can't partner with other churches and clubs who have newsletters, right? Especially if they're electronic or, and so asking them to put their information in those newsletters and maybe start to collaborate, because, I know that a lot of us are having the same challenges of getting volunteers for different clubs, right? So if you have a few clubs that will work together on this, your chances of getting a volunteer committee are increased, right? So look at collaborating, not just doing it with one club as well. But yeah, there's so many different ways to get the information out there. So.
Well, that's a good point, because when I talked about the history of the Citizenship Project, one of the things we found out in a survey that the Luso American Foundation funded in 1998 was that nobody talked to each other. You didn't find the states talking to each other. New Jersey didn't talk to Rhode Island. Rhode Island didn't talk to Massachusetts. Santo Cristo didn't talk to Mount Carmel. I mean, Santo Cristo and Fall River didn't talk to Mount Carmel, and especially about political affairs, Mount Carmel and New Bedford. And then individual clubs didn't work together. And I think you're absolutely right. Like maybe a Rancho Folklorico maybe has like 100 families involved, but the Banda Philharmonica maybe have 150 families involved. Well, you put them together and maybe put in Amigos de Tercera together with that. Well, suddenly you're getting into the 500s and 600s. And yes, you have a bigger pool of people that you can get to be volunteers. But the volunteers can't be part-time. They can't just go in for one meeting and then drop out. They have to be hardcore.
They have to have staying power. Yeah, agreed.
Right.
And then, the collaboration aspect speaks directly to the message that we're trying to communicate here with voting, is that we have greater power in numbers, right?
Right.
If we are a voting population, the politicians will pay attention to us. And how do we have numbers? We collaborate, we come together and work together and have a stronger voice together. So it's a natural synergy, clubs working together and raising up the population to vote collectively. Mm-hmm. So anyway. All right, next slide.
Okay, so on to the next, the event details. And I'll let you, because we really didn't do events, but that's not to downplay the importance of this. But I'll let you talk to that for a bit, if you
Sure.
don't mind.
Sure. And so just full disclosure here that I have never personally run an event, a voter registration event. These suggestions have come from what I've heard others have done. So again, I speak to the NIPALC example. And the events that they have run. And so, I mean, if you just look at some of the basic things that you would need, you need a venue. So does your church have a hall? Maybe there's the local club. We have a lot of Portuguese halls here in California. So is there a hall, a venue that's willing to give you the space for free, essentially, because we need volunteers and we also need as much material and space for free to continue to do this work. If you have to pay for everything all the time, it prevents it from becoming repeatable, right? So identify a venue. We've talked about getting volunteers to work it and not only helping plan, but to sit at the tables to, as you mentioned before, provide assistance in filling out some of the forms, checking the forms to make sure that they're filled out correctly, answering questions, that sort of thing. So let's say, Jim, what would you say? Maybe a table, 3 tables with at least 3 people, that could handle, as people come in and, sit there and ask for assistance. I mean, we're not talking to have 20 tables or anything like that. If you have that, great. But maybe a minimum of 3 would be a good place to start.
I guess it depends on the agenda and how it is and how, like if you have people sort of, for a registration event and there will be a lot of free time, 3 or 4 people would be fine. You don't want to have too many volunteers because that looks bad. If you have 10 volunteers and only 2 of them are really working hard and the You know, see,
Right.
I mean, it's all image.
Yeah.
A lot of this is all image. So it's like when you have a group, when you have an event, and you always want to make sure your meeting hall is slightly smaller than the amount of people you're going to have there, because then you'll have people standing in the back and it looks like it's a popular event.
Right.
If you have too big of a venue, or you know, and it's just an empty hall with a couple people at the table, well, then that's a negative. You don't want this to be. You want it to work, and you want people to register, but you want to you always have to. Maybe this, I don't know how to say. You always want to show strength.
Right. Well, and so maybe too, it's something where like it's almost like an open house, right? So it's people come in and out, and so you say we're going to be registering people from 10 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, and you know, people just come and go, and so it's not like you have to come all during this hour, right? So it's like you know, it could work either way. Maybe you do, you know, I guess depending on what you think is going to work for your community. That's why it really just depends on where you are, and the committee can decide how they want to structure it, right?
The one thing, getting back to our system, is always measure. Like, let's say you have an event, you've done your best, and you've gotten this, and you've registered 150 people. All right, you've got a measurement, and then you say, okay, how much time did it take? How much resources you put in? 150 people, that's good. That's good. You came up with 10. If you came up with 15, don't do it just because you did it. Do it because it works. I use this example in the book that you had, and I saw this, especially, I saw it several times in New Bedford. Well, you'll get 3 or 4 people. I mean, they're totally committed people. I'm not criticizing it. They're sitting in the hot August sun in a festival, and everybody's having a riotous time out there. And they'll come by and talk to them because you're friends with everybody. But the question is how, if you sat in the sun there for about 5 hours, and California has its share of the sun in the summer, as we well know, like 180 degrees, you know, and you're sitting out there and you registered 10 people, you're going to have to think about that. You know, I mean, one pastor talked about use of volunteers as killing the willing. You know, that people are willing to work. Yeah, you don't use them just as a free good. You use them as long as it makes effect, and then if it doesn't, then find out a better way to do it.
Right.
But if it works, then you repeat it. But measure is a very important thing. After the event, see what you did, and do it again if it works.
And do it again, or exactly. I was just going to say, and if it didn't work, maybe try something different.
Right.
You know, people always, whenever they go somewhere to get something, you know, or to do something, having a sticker, I registered to vote, and you can get those probably from the voter registrar's office, right? I'm sure they have tons of those. And then if you want to have cookies and punch, and, you know, people can chit chat for a bit, but just, you know, we're natural event planners anyway as Portuguese. So just kind of think about how you would want to structure the event and what would work best for your community. And then the other option is, and you sort of mentioned this already, Jim, that if you don't want to have an event and you have a table at a festa or a dinner or some other event, think about how that best would work. For example, you know, like you said, you don't want to sit in the sun for 5 hours and only register 2 people. So do you have signage? Do you have, you know, register to vote and enter to win, or, you know, gullible sellers or something like that? You know, what can you do to bring people to your table?
Yeah, but you can't put prizes in. I think that there's actually a law.
Oh, really?
That. Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, sorry.
I don't know about voter registration, but there was an idea that maybe have, you know, so if you went and voted, you know, that you would be eligible for a prize or something like that. I think that's against the law. So it may extend to voter registration, but that's
we'll have to check on that.
Yeah,
we'll have to check on that just to be sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you get, let's say, if you register to vote and get a free, like a gullible sellers sticker or something like that? Can you do that?
Yeah. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
We'll check on it. And then we'll let everybody know. Okay.
I don't want to go to jail.
I don't either. Okay. Next slide.
The resources, and I think this cannot be understated. And I have been in 5 states, and I have been in small voter registration offices. I've been in large voter registration offices, and I can say without qualification that the helpfulness and the welcome, these people are happy to see you, and they're happy to be involved in what you're doing. If you ask them for training and say, look, we got 3 or 4 volunteers. We want to make sure we know exactly what's going on. Can one of your staff members come to us, or can we go there? And can you tell us exactly? We want to be, if not experts, semi-experts in all this stuff to help you do your job. They would be happy. Speaking at your event may be a push, but I think I would make it because they would be honored to even hear that. Voter registrars, it's a very strange office. They operate in complete obscurity. Nobody knows where the office is. Nobody knows who they are until just before an election. And then, bang, everybody wants to talk to them and everybody knows where they are. So these people are very happy to provide material. And I'm talking with a broad range of experience in all these places. They want to help. So consider the local voter registration office as not a foreign event, that they are your people and they are trying to do what you're trying to do. And they can probably have some excellent ideas because, I've done this for a mere 10 years. They've done this for a lifetime. And they've seen the whole thing across a wide range of ethnic communities and a wide range of interest groups. So that's there. The other thing, and it probably less important, because I think the local voter registration office, is at Portuguese American ORG, there's how to coordinate a voter registration event guide that was written by Antonio Borba. It's how to organize politically, and that can walk you through a lot of the things that we're talking about now. Basically, that's what we're doing. And there's elements of sample letters. Also,
that's really helpful.
But there's the directors and the people that have been active in the Portuguese American Citizenship Project, many of whom are PALCUS members, they haven't gone away. The project's disbanded, but the people and their commitment to the community are still there. So if you need any reference in your particular community, I would be happy. I'm sure you can also provide names of people that are active in the community and can point people in the right direction. So that's important. So what happens next? And Our Lady of Fatima Elizabeth, you have had all the new voter registration people, you have all this information. Keep records of these things. Find out who the new voters are, because registering to vote is a necessary. You have to be registered to vote. But it doesn't count unless you vote. The sufficient condition to be civically active is you vote. You register and you vote. You want to make sure these people get to the polls. And in our current environment, there is a lot of questions about voting. Like with the coronavirus going underway, there's the ballot questions. And some people are resisting, some people are pushing. And in fact, the sides are switching sides all over the place on what should be done. This is a changing set of rules that we have to be aware of up until the date of the election. Because there will be, if they're going to have ballots, there's going to be deadlines. There's going to be whether you have to know all these stuff. Now we're moving beyond voter registration now. We're moving using the information we have from registering, say in a church, you registered 200 people, you have their names, you have their addresses. You have a lot of other information on registered voters in the church, but that's a get out the vote campaign. But make sure these people understand how to do it. They had one example of how intimidating voting is. There were people, and this is a true story, in New Bedford, that some elderly people that were citizens, they became citizens, and the Immigrants Assistance Center had worked them through the process of that. But they hadn't, and they were registered to vote, but they never voted because their English isn't so well. Not so well. I said not so good. So they felt intimidated. Well, we sent these voter cards out. I haven't got an example, but they sent Portuguese American. It was a reminder to every registered voter from the Immigrants Assistance Center to vote. And it had your name, your address, and it said every vote brings dignity and respect to our community. But it had your name. And these people would come, a lot of them were taken to the polls by the Immigrant Assistance Center, And somebody would say, well, what's your name and address? Well, if you're not fluent in English and this person, is talking with a New England accent, you're just not that comfortable. You might just turn around and just walk out the door and say, look, this person's intimidating me. Or they're just doing their job. Some ladies had actually said, there were ladies, because all us old guys die early, that they show the card and it says, Soil. It has their name and address. And the voter card, the voter official would take the card and just write it all down. They were good to go. It is such a simple little trick, just that's me, And the guy said, oh, okay, got that. But there's all sorts of rules about what sort of information you have to have. Sometimes to the point of proving citizenship, that's really off on the wings, but you have to have photo IDs, you have to have this. You can't just go walking in most states and say, hey, I'm here, I want to vote. You got to prove who you are. Absentee ballots, that gets into filling out the forms properly and doing things properly. And the same committee that was doing the voter registration may want to be available to help people, not how to vote, but how to fill, not who to vote for, but how to fill out the form. The voting choice, very important, is to the individual voter, but you can assist. You can assist in making sure all the blocks are filled out, just like a voter registration form. So the committee, and this is sort of, once you get into voter registration and you get into the second stage, you have to know that all the newly registered voters, in fact, all the registered voters know the rules and regulations. You can do that through a bulletin. You can put that in the church bulletin. Please be aware that you have to have your driver's license or a government-issued ID, or whatever the rules are. Just take them straight out of the voter registration roll. So there'll be no surprises. Because if you get turned away from the polls, I think a vast majority of people say, well, the hell with that, I'm out of here. And they don't vote. And we don't want that to happen. Now, the next thing, and this is a subtle thing, this is a presidential campaign. And the hard reality is that 1.5 estimated Portuguese Americans scattered throughout the United States are probably not going to determine who the next president of the United States are. It's important that they vote. It's important that they exercise their civic responsibility. I'm not saying not to do that. But more importantly, next year's elections are going to be in many places city elections. Next places in New Jersey especially are going to be state elections. Then suddenly Portuguese American community gets power. That's when you start electing mayors. That's when you start becoming influential and electing mayors, electing school board members, electing people that have direct and immediate impact. You have run a voter registration campaign. You have a lot of information of how to mobilize your community. What this is taking advantage of the energy of a presidential election where everybody's turned on. You can't turn on the TV, open a newspaper. You can't get on the social media. Well, that's something to do with this year's election. You want to carry that over into next year. Because when you want to empower the community, that's when you're really going to move the needle. And we saw that. We worked with 4 churches. This is in New Bedford and Fall River, but Rhode Island was the same thing. These 4 churches accounted for 20% of the votes cast in local elections. That's just 4 churches, and I don't know, there's another 6 churches in each community that are Portuguese American. Only the ones we worked with accounted for 20% of the vote. You can't ignore that. So you not only get involved, this is politics. When we first started this citizenship project, we'd tell people, well, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's not a marathon, it's a never-ending battle. You can't say, oh, we elected the mayor, we have a school board that's favorable to our interests, so we got this going, and you're satisfied. Because if you're not moving forward, you're going to be moving backwards. The idea is that registering people to vote for this presidential election, when everybody's turned on, and they want to have a vote on who's going to be the next president of the United States, and governors and senators, but basically the president is what's really got everybody turned on, to participation. You want to carry that over into the next year. And you want to carry it over. You can build a political process with that hardcore of volunteers that can carry into next year. And then The next year, you elect all, a third of the Senate and all the House of Representatives, and it goes on and on. You just you want to use the information you have from this year and this enthusiasm into the next years. And that's when I think we make a difference.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective on what's realistic, right, in terms of where votes count. But we certainly don't want to give the impression that we're saying Portuguese votes don't count in a presidential election, right? So I know that's not what you meant. I just don't want anybody to watch this and say they're saying that our votes don't count for the president. And that's not what we're saying. We're just trying to be realistic in the bigger
We're doing
picture.
realistic, right. But when you go vote in a presidential election, you're also voting for state senator. Now, you have state senators, so you're also casting votes in local elections. But the turnout rate is so big. I don't want to diminish the importance of voting this year. God knows, I think it's vitally important at every citizen, because this is going to determine our future for the next 4 years. And if you don't vote, you've lost your complaining privileges. You can't complain about the direction we're going or whether we're going up or down or sideways. If you didn't vote, you just have to stand to the side and let the real people who actually participate in civic affairs, they can talk about whether they're happy or not. But yes, it's important to know that there are local officials that are still running for office in this election. It's not just the president of the United States. So there's all people all down the line, and your votes count there more. I mean, who you make, and these are subtle things, like who a state senator is, or do you have state offices up for grabs? I think
this year, I think so.
Yeah, in California, you have to understand what their positions are on foreign language education, what's their position on, things, all these things. Budgets are going to be extremely strained in this year. So you got to find out, well, who's going to get what? Are the schools going to be adequately funded? What's going to happen here, there, and other? These are important questions. No, it's vitally important that people vote this year.
Right.
But I'm just saying that this is a continuity of process. We're taking advantage of this enthusiasm. We should take advantage of this enthusiasm.
And the momentum and the desire.
And move it forward so that next year and the year following, because if you run a campaign, and we realized this early on in the Citizenship Project, if you're running a 1-year campaign to get people out and mobilize everybody to vote, but it's understood that you're not going to be around the next year, you have no influence. Because once the election's over, you're gone. You have to be there at all times. And that's one thing about PALCUS. PALCUS was an organization before the Citizenship Project started, and is an organization that continues on. And I think it's the responsibility of PALCUS and its membership, of which I'm a member, is to keep the ball rolling. And I think that's important.
Can you talk a little bit about the keeping records aspect? I know it might sound a little in the weeds, but what does that look like? Is it an Excel spreadsheet? Is it a sign-up sheet? Is it can you just kind of give an idea of what kind of records are best or easiest to work with?
It can be anything from a computer-generated list, which I had. We would get the voter registration list from, say, Stanislaus County. We would marry that together with the church list, and then we would have a list of every registered voters, man, woman, and child. Well, not children, you have to be over 18, on that church. That is a powerful list. But that was the church's list. It was not for politicians. It was not for anybody else. It was proprietary to the church. They let us use it to help them to simply manage the data. But it can be anything. Let's say that you don't have and it takes a degree of computer expertise. It took me 2 years to gain it, to learn how to put this stuff together. But you can go to the other side. Let's say that you've run an event and you've registered 30 or 40 people. You could write it down on a piece of paper. You want their name, you want their address, you want an email, stuff like that. So when you get to that second stage of voting, and the rules on mail-in ballots have changed, there's a new deadline, or you have to have an ID, you can set up just your own mailing list for these people who are the most vulnerable, who know the least, because it's the first time out. Anytime you do anything for the first time, it's scary. You want to make sure that they know, or if they need help. Sometimes the elderly, and that's what the Immigrant Assistance Center did in New Bedford, is the first time out, they took them to the polls. They walked, well, if you have that list, it could be a handwritten list. It could be a computer-generated list of all the church and stuff like that. Anything you can put together is information. But the important thing is you don't share it with any outside group. We had, and I won't mention the state, but we had it for a very powerful church. We had the whole list, and one politician called me up and said, Jim, look, could you give me that list because I want to compare it with our list? And I said, well, that's fine. Ask the priest. If the priest says it's okay because it's his list, well, the priest isn't going to give him. That went no further. You can't do that. Because what you do is you compromise the information. The church is proprietary, not church. The information is proprietary to the church and should be treated with the utmost secrecy.
Sure, absolutely.
And that's important. And you can brandish it. You can say, hey, we have charts that we do, Immaculate Conception Church in New Bedford, 2,643 registered voters. When you have that, you don't put over 2,000, you don't put over 20, you put exactly the number. That means you know who they are, you know where they live, and you know how to get in contact with them. That's all the political system has to know. And you're willing to wield that sword.
You could actually go to the voter registrar's office and ask for a list of registered voters. Are you just going to get names, or are you going to get where they live and other stuff?
You get, well, first of all, there's rules, okay? And let's talk about the rules. When you get this list, you that's a powerful list. You have people that go to your local church or people that live in a whole community. You could sell vacuum cleaners with that. That's breaking the law. You can use it for very specific rules, getting people to register to vote, getting them to participate in civic affairs. Any local voter registrar will tell you that's the Lord's work. That's good stuff. And they will give that. You are entitled to it. Some states, Massachusetts in particular, are very, very possessive. I have, for California, Stanislaus County, Alameda County, Los Angeles County, San Francisco, I have whole blocks of people. My computer got indigestion from all the stuff I get. I got it for the same thing in New Jersey. In Connecticut and Rhode Island, I have the whole state's voter registration list. In Massachusetts, they would only give you town by town. So I had to go to cities, towns, villages, which had 500 people living in it to get their voter registration list. And they're doing that on purpose because that information is very powerful. And they restrict it. Sorry to get preachy about this.
No, that's okay. And you,
to the political class.
Yeah, and you went as a representative of the Portuguese American Citizenship Project that was running a voter registration campaign. You can't just walk in as a citizen and say, can I have the list? You have to.
Well, you can, but you should bring a lawyer with you. Part of it is we started in Fall River, and we had the endorsement and participation of the pastors of the major churches. And we had Donna Miranda was one of the godmothers of this whole operation. She knew people in the voter registration office. So once you go in there and you get it once, also in New Bedford, Maria Tomasia is the voter registrar and has been active in Portuguese American affairs since she was a young woman. She not only gave us a list, she told us, she showed me how to manipulate the list. I mean, it's electronic gobbledygook. You got to figure out how to sort it all out. And we came up with a system that I can take your church data and I can put it together with a voter registration list and peel out all the churches, all the church members who are registered to vote. And that becomes the go-to-war list for get out the vote campaigns. But that's sophisticated stuff. And I think one of the things with the demise of the Citizenship Project, we've lost that capability to, we did it nationally. We did it for 52 organizations every year. At a maximum of 52 work. Pardon?
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot, and then we would do voter cards off of that, since that had the name and address and all this other stuff. But that's a whole, this is beyond the thing of registering people to vote. And I think people were intimidated by that. And you can do a lot of things short of that. If you have a new list of registered voters, you can get them involved and realize that they're the most vulnerable people in learning how to vote. And the one thing is too, and I mentioned this earlier in this presentation, is young people are by and large organized. You are not organized, registered to vote. They can register through the high school. If they get a new driver's license in many states, you get registered to vote. There's 1,000 ways. You almost have to work to avoid being registered to vote as an American teenager. However, getting these people to the polls is the next cab off the rank, and that's a difficult operation. And that's again beyond this discussion.
All right, so we're at the end. Let's we'll wrap it up. Right, we're getting ready for the elections.
Getting ready for the election and getting ready for future elections too. This is it's not a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's a process, and we always have to be involved. And that's
so. This is an example of a flyer that is just it's showing all of these organizations coming together to say yes, we need to vote as a community.
These are the some of the organizations that have been involved. That we just put their logos on and put it. I think it's instructive to see just the range of people. The UPEC, which was a fraternal organization in California, churches, clubs, a whole different set. It's all over the map. And there's nothing in Florida here. There is nothing in other states. There's nothing in Pennsylvania. You had mentioned New York. We at the last years of our project, we went into New York, Elmano Costa and Stephen Nascimento, but we had sort of run out of resources to deal with. I mean, you can only deal with so many things. We're trying to create a process. Some of it, I think, will continue. Some of it may be in the too tough to do box. But I think that's why we're making all this available to PALCUS through its website, and basically assuming the picking up the baton, as it were.
Yeah, passing the baton. So to your point earlier, this is one example of you've registered people to vote. Now you got to get them to vote, and so continuing the communications and the awareness and everything like that. So
and I have to say that I mentioned the Immigrant Assistance Center taking those ladies to vote, and
that was
Helena
great.
Marcus and Elena Silva Hughes now had said, she called me and she said, I have to tell you the energy of those women when they came back. They were.
That's awesome.
You couldn't stop them from voting in the next election.
That's amazing.
They were all in.
That was really great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that concludes we've killed an hour, Jim, if you can believe it or not. And I'm sure there's still more we could touch on, but I think we've hit the high points. We recorded this. We're going to make it available on our website, on our YouTube channel, on Facebook. So anybody that missed it can go back and watch. We're going to, again, some of the resources on your website, on the PortugueseAmerican.org website, we'll make available to people. So really, we will be doing our part to spread the word about registering to vote and the importance of that. And I just want to thank you for your time to putting the slides together and all the work that you and the rest of your team did over the last, 10, 15 years of existence? 16 years of Portuguese American Citizenship Project. It's really, really good work. So thank you very much for all of it.
Well, thank you.
And so just to wrap up here, I want to give a shout out to, we are still running our Sponsor a Meal campaign for support our elders during COVID-19, because we do have a lot of elders that are still sheltered in place in their homes, in their senior residences. They're not able to interact with their families or go to the grocery stores like they normally were. And so we are working with the Massachusetts Alliance of Portuguese Speakers, the Immigrants Assistance Center, PALCUS, and Valer here in California to raise funds, and then we will distribute those funds to those organizations that are already doing such wonderful work in supporting our elders and our community nationwide. So it's, $12 a meal. You can support 1 meal, 10 meals, 2 meals, whatever works for you. So please visit palcus.org/sponsor a meal and make your donation today. This, as I mentioned, this webinar is being archived. So if you want to go back and watch it again and get some important information, please go back and watch it and share this webinar with friends and family. It's a free resource. And if you are interested in sponsoring a webinar, this is a great opportunity. Working from home, we got the dogs in the background, sorry. We are reaching tens of thousands of people with our webinars, especially in the post views section. So if you'd like to sponsor a webinar, please reach out to PALCUS. And with that, thanks everybody for watching. Thank you again, Jim. And we're doing another one next week. So we look forward to it. And until then, até a próxima. Have a great day, everybody.
Até já. Okay.
Thank you, Jim. Bye-bye.